So picture this. Humanity is on a collision course with a climate crisis. But what if I told you we already have 80% of the solution to stop it? Sounds hopeful, right? But we're not out of the woods yet. Welcome to Liquid Assets. I'm your host, Ravi Kurani, and today I'm joined by Ryan Kushner, a driving force behind climate tech innovation and co-founder of Third Derivative. We're diving into the future of clean energy, carbon capture, and how startups are accelerating the solutions that could change the fate of our planet. From startup accelerators to scaling technologies that'll define our future, this episode is packed with insights on how we can turn the tide on the climate crisis. Get ready for a conversation that could reshape how you think about climate tech. Let's jump in. Today, we have an awesome guest for you today, a really old friend from San Francisco, actually, Ryan Kushner.
I'm Ryan Kushner. I'm the co-founder of Third Derivative, the climate technology accelerator of the Rocky Mountain Institute, and author of Accelerate This, a super not boring guide of startup accelerators and clean energy entrepreneurship. Check out the podcast.
Ryan, we were talking about earlier, you guys have 160 startups. Tell us more about that. And you've been at the forefront of accelerating and bringing money into the climate tech world. Let's jump into that.
Sure. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here. Yeah, we're old friends. Know your sister. We've connected through accelerators through the years and through various businesses and phases of life. So I appreciate that. And I appreciate being here. My sort of life in climate technology, which is inclusive of water, I really began when I moved to San Francisco and I went to the Presidio graduate school. I saw the Keeling curve. I saw how the concentrations of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And it's okay. Here we are, humanity, industrial revolution. Holy shit, you are here. And I knew that was a compelling issue to work on. And at first I didn't know. So I dropped into the world of activism and protest. And then I discovered that we have effectively the solutions or the formula for the solutions that we need to solve this big, crazy problem. And there are going to be tons of ancillary benefits. Or we know what solutions we need, and we are smart people and we like making businesses. We can do that. The particular sort of methodology that I fell into were accelerators, which for me being fairly ADD was just fun because I after Presidio, I worked at a climate tech startup. And then when I went to work at Elemental Accelerator, which I think is where we first encountered each other and specifically has like a water vertical. We had 40 startups in the portfolio there. So I got to learn about a really broad sort of swath of companies and technologies and just have a macro sort of view on where we're at. We're in a climate crisis and we're trying to get to stabilization and drawdown. Where are we and what do we need to be doing? That was really important for me, just in terms of my nervous system, to know, are we screwed? Are we going to be great? Are we going to be okay? Like, where are we at in this timeline? And so we can talk a little bit about that, but having that sort of macro view worked really well. And then working accelerate as you get that broad view. And so worked at Elemental, and then I had the chance to collaborate with the New Energy Nexus to write my book, which is called Accelerate This, a super not boring guide to startup accelerators and clean energy entrepreneurship. And that was the chance to jump out of being like a practitioner and more into sort of an academic researcher. And I got to call up all of the really interesting innovation programs that I knew about, put them into a book, learn about them. And that was a really gratifying process to learn how many arrows in the quiver, how many approaches there are. Like, what have we come up with in terms of accelerators, incubators, venture studios, prizes? What are those things? How do they work? Do they work? And what's like the secret sauce of some really interesting select ones? And then to the current day, what you're referring to is my current project, which is a collaboration with the Rocky Mountain Institute. It's a program of RMI called Third Derivative. And we launched around 3.5 years ago. And we have, as you mentioned, 160 startups in the program now. Very ambitious. We're reaching towards 500 by 2026 with a whole bunch of themed cohorts, which we can get into a lot of geeky detail about. But that's my background, what I've done, and where I'm going.
Super cool, man. There's like a ton to unpack there. I want to go back to the beginning and just redefine some terms for people. You'd mentioned the Keeling curve and drawdown. For folks that don't know what both of those things are, can you explain them in a layperson's term?
Sure. I'm a layperson too, so I very much relate to that. So the Keeling curve, and I might have some details wrong here, but it is the measure of concentration of carbon dioxide in the environment. I think it's from the Mauna Loa Observatory. Please yell at me if I get these details wrong. But we know from ice core samples back 20,000 years and more recent history, we've been monitoring how much carbon dioxide is in the environment, which has been fairly stable until about the 1700s when we started burning a significant amount of coal, and then population expansion and change of land use. But it's a really interesting graph with a crazy hockey stick, which shows carbon dioxide. It's at about 270 effectively for the entire extent of the modern Homo sapien existent, what we're used to. And then it's shot up dramatically since then. So now we're at 400-ish, and that's unprecedented and crazy. And it shows graphically, like, you are here. Like, you as a person were born into this human experience at a time when shit is hitting the fan. And we're just starting to recognize that, make plans for that, help other people understand that. It's relatively unintuitive because this is not something that one expects out of life. And so that sort of, it encapsulates the climate crisis in a graph, for more or less.
And you said earlier too that you had this coming to life moment where you're like, man, after you saw this graph, you're like, is there a way forward? Are the technologies there? What kind of conclusion did you come to? And that's a loaded question here, but what happened after that?
It was really a process of stages of grief in a way, where it was like denial. No, that can't be right. Bargaining. Oh, but if. Acceptance, so on and so forth. But it really began my sort of intellectual exploration of, well, what does this mean? And how bad will things get? And are we going to survive? And at the time, that was around 2018, 2019, the answers were just coming into focus. And great work was done by organizations like Drawdown and others to ask the question, we understand the problem. We know the sources of carbon and we know what's causing the issue. But what are there in terms of solutions? Can we do this? Can we stabilize? Can we exist in basically more or less with some latency the world we are now, which is hurricanes in California and fires in Hawaii and so on? Can we progress? Can we draw carbon down? And that began the journey to look at that and understand that. There was a sense that at the time, rough numbers, clean energy was becoming cheaper. It was hitting the cost crossovers where clean energy was becoming very quickly cheaper than fossil fuels. And so there was a sense that eventually we would get to a fossil-free world. But how quickly, what's the ancillary damage? And roughly there was we had in hand around 2019, around 60-ish% of the technology we needed to address a large amount of it, but then we need to invent that other 40%. And it's, to some degree, it's a false dichotomy. And that's one of the things we talk about. The derivative is, with our portfolio of 160 startups and growing, some are novel solutions, some are sequestering solutions. Those are novel. Some are other solutions that contribute or accelerate other larger solutions, software that powers solar, or better electrolyzers to make cheaper hydrogen. So it's, the innovation happens both in that sort of novel 40%, we don't have this, but we need it, but also it accelerates that existing 60% to be faster. Now the calculus has changed, and this is like rough numbers, but we have in hand most of the solutions, probably 75, 80%, and 20% are novel. But we know better than we ever have. There is so much deployment and we have so much data on this. And we've been looking at it. We have a sense of what the future is going to be like. And I guess the good news, or definitely the good news, is that we've avoided a absolute climate catastrophic, call it 3 to 10 degrees Celsius rise. And so that is like the end of Earth in any recognizable way. And that was very much on the table when I looked at that Keeling curve and I started to be curious about this. But because solutions have continued apace and the rational economics of the market are just that we add almost 85-ish% of all of the new energy last year, what added to the grid as we add more EVs and as population grows is clean energy. And that grows every year. So you can see from a grid perspective and now from a vehicle perspective where that's going. And so drawing that all out, we're not going to be in like a 3 or 4 degree, 5, 6, 7 to 10 degree world. We'll probably be in like a 2 to 3 degree centigrades rise from pre-industrial levels. And that's very bad, but not completely catastrophic. And every sort of 10th of the percentage matters a lot for everyone's life and stability and like being able to live in a world and fly places and do things and have supply chains. That's when I lecture at Singularity University about the pace of exponential change. I say, thank you, exponential technology. We've avoided this. And here are the things that we need to do right now to avoid more pain in the future. And there's a fantastic economic case for avoided cost down the line and investments and income to be made now in what we're very firmly in is the great energy transition.
And what are those points? Actually, that's a really interesting segue. When you gave that talk at Singularity, what are those handful of bullet points of things that we can do today?
There are quite a few. The end of the pipe, as far as we know, is the world is basically wind and solar and storage. And all EVs, even if we had not great policies, which thankfully we do, depending on the geography now, that's just what gets cheaper. Fossil fuels are a commodity. They're not a technology. And so by some measures, they've never gotten cheaper. Like internal combustion engine is effectively as expensive or cheap as it was when it was invented relative to costs and strength of the dollar. And so we know that there is going to be like wind solar batteries plus some nuclear and a suite of smaller solutions. What we can do now is invest in all the things that accelerate that, all the things that draw down carbon, all of the things that get us to a net zero world faster, like more EVs, financing to EVs, places, everything along the EV chain to transition away from transportation fossil fuels, everything along the energy generation, transmission, storage, supply chain for grids, anything in clean or regenerative agriculture, and particularly things that draw down carbon. That can be natural solutions or economic solutions as well. And so that last thing is really the most unexplored and newest area, because you can imagine that if we're in the world we are now, there's still some sort of like latent heat and emissions. We're in a very disrupted world right now. And so we don't really want to be in a 400, 450 degree world. We want to be in a 270, the world that is most beneficial and familiar to human life. And the entire world of carbon capture, carbon drawdown is something that needs to be worked on dramatically right now, in addition to everything that accelerates all of the existing solutions. And just to say at Third Derivative, we have like focus areas. We launched with a focus on energy, buildings, transportation and industry, which is sort of anything in manufacturing. And then we've moved quickly into sort of themed cohorts, which are sub technologies or novel technologies where we can get together little coalitions of startups, the corporates that want to work with them, and the VCs that want to fund them, along wrapped all around sort of their derivative. And I really just find the startups, uh, vet them, bring them into the fold, and also pair them with sort of policy and everything else beyond the customers and the finance. And so right now we have two theme cohorts. One is Clean Mobile Power, which is a partnership with Netflix and Disney. And that's basically clean generators. And starting with this sort of Tesla approach, where we'll deploy on production sites where there is budget and then make it cheaper and then be able to get that more widely and specifically into the global south. And then our second theme cohort, which we're doing right now, which is sponsored by the Grantham Foundation, which is specifically around carbon capture and direct air capture. And so having a coalition to have some network effects within that. And then we'll be moving into petrochemicals, steel, cement, hydrogen. We're working on forming those sort of technological association working groups, innovation spheres. And that's like the things that we're leaning into. That'll be part of our future growth of their derivative.
Super cool. Yeah, I want to actually take a few steps back for the audience because I know we have a few folks in corporate that also listen to this as well, and they may be a little bit unfamiliar with the startup ecosystem. Can you just give a really high level understanding of what is the accelerator model, right? And if you're a startup and you're going through this journey of raising money, building your product, where does accelerators fit on that? And I think that probably ties in really well with your book, Accelerate This. But then the second question is around unpacking what you just said around third derivative. What exactly is third derivative? And then given kind of the accelerator model and where startups are in their journey, how does that kind of fit in with third derivative and the Rocky Mountain Institute?
Yeah, great questions. And jump in this journey very well as an entrepreneur, being in accelerators and beyond. So I work on the programmatic aspect. You've been in them as a program. And so I'd say you have a lot of thought experience. So put out there as you see. But effectively, an accelerator is a small business support system, right? And so if you are a startup, it's incredibly hard. The failure rate's very high. And so accelerators exist to increase the growth rate and the survival rate of technologies. Specifically in my vertical in climate tech, we in third derivative and beyond, generally there's an application process, a vetting process, some number get into the program. We try to service all of the companies that apply in some way, just from building an ecosystem perspective. And then programs generally offer some form of financial support, access to customers, access to mentors, basically anything that you need as an entrepreneur as you're trying to understand the market, develop your technology, develop your team, and grow and scale responsibly. So you can grow your business and, from my perspective, grow the impact. You can have an accelerator, and there are accelerators for anything. There are a million, and that's fantastic. I really focus on using capitalism to solve capitalism. So using I only work with for-profit companies generally, although we are a nonprofit. And that's important from being a neutral sort of beneficial ecosystem actor perspective. By working with for-profit solutions to give them the money and the support that they need to grow. And then also to have the corporates play a great role because they're potential customers. And there's three-ish reasons why corporates would want to be a part of an accelerator. One is because they're looking for technology that they want to use and that they want to use as part of their deployment. That number one reason. Number two is they're interested in the technology, but potentially that they want to invest in it and maybe absorb it completely or be a stockholder in it or a shareholder in it because they understand the economics around it. And the third is a general sort of CSR perspective where they have money. They should be doing something good. This is in their vertical on the process of understanding it.
Cool. Yeah.
Mm.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just thinking about, did I tick off all of the questions that you had around accelerators? Oh, then you want to know specifically around their derivative?
Yeah, exactly. Just if you can explain both to me and the audience, so now you started Third Derivative and then it was sucked up into the Rocky Mountain Institute. What was the relationship there and what exactly is the purpose of both entities? What do they do?
The Rocky Mountain Institute has been around for 30 plus years. Now it's a 700 plus person organization and 7 or 8 global offices, a really large organization that does amazing work understanding the techno-economics of the energy transition and energy efficiency and policy and so forth. It really had a great hand in shaping the Inflation Reduction Act and consults with world governments and corporations all around the world. And so what they were curious about was adding to their portfolio. There's about 30 programs, adding to their portfolio of programs, all within the banner of the energy transition and trying to keep the world within roughly a 1.5 degree rise, having an accelerator so they can work directly with technology, put a finger on the scale of what technology is going to be funded using their corporate network. And so that's where the collaboration came from. I was at the New Energy Nexus at the time and wrote the book. We were approached. And so we formed it as effectively a partnership of a program that is firmly within Rocky Mountain Institute. And so we are a program of Rocky Mountain Institute, and we have a really synchronistic relationship like with the mothership as we pursue our own program goals and so on and so forth. The program itself is great. It was like a dream come true for me as someone that's like a super geek around accelerator programs and understanding like, how do they work? How do they not work? How are they great? Where do they fail startups? There's a lot of criticism. A lot of people have been burned from a programmatic perspective and lessons learned. I try to bake a lot of that sort of into the book. And I work with a lot of accelerators as they're forming to structure it to be maximally helpful and minimally destructive along their path to all of their partners, especially the startups. And so Third Derivative was an incredible opportunity because Rocky Mountain said, okay, Ryan, you wrote the book. You have a lot of experience with this. Tell us what our program should be. And I was like waiting for the but or the twist or the keep it within blah, blah, blah. But it was really like a blank slate, sort of blue sky project, which from an impact perspective is what you want. And so we set out to design the program, which we tried to make as entrepreneur friendly as possible, as ecosystem building and give back as possible. So the long and short of it is that it's an 18-month program. It's very light touch. And so we talk to our startups as they need, but roughly around like once a month or so. And we have like check-in with them and we ask them what resources they need. When you're stepping into the program, you're given the opportunity to have $100,000 US convertible note, which means that the value of the note converts at your next round. And so there's not a lot of complicated negotiation that happens at the start of it. And also you don't need to take the note if you don't want to. You can, as a startup, about 20%, 30% of the companies don't take the note. And that's fine with them. We consider them absolutely full members of the program. We help them just as much because our interest is in working with the most impactful and the best startups in the world, helping them grow and scale and achieve their potential impact. We don't really want to get on their balance sheet as our first priority. Having the 100K is actually a separate for-profit entity that is a partnership, but we make sure to keep the mission separate from the economics. Although the economics are always in the center because these are for-profit companies. And unless they have a market and a technology that will sell, they can't impact. And then the program, we have incredible corporate partners, about 13 corporate partners, a 4 trillion market cap, and I think now 14 venture capital partners with 800 million AUM. And so it's a very large network. And so what you get as applying to the program, getting in is that we say, okay, like Ravi, we love Sutra. We don't love whatever you're working on. It's a good time to talk to this VC firm, or it's a good time to talk to this corporation. And we do timely and appropriate introductions where we're always trying to do pattern matching and make sure that everyone's ready for the conversation and we seed it correctly. And then we let the sort of economics unfold. In addition to the 100K, just for what it's worth, we're also exploring our own sort of bit of financial tools, like an early stage fund, a later stage fund, a first of a kind fund. Like we understand from a growing startups perspective, leaning on financing partners is great, but there's also the opportunity to be involved in that and help use our knowledge of the companies to benefit the economics and benefit the companies as well. And so that's one of the things we're going into. Does that sort of get at?
Yeah,
From like,
totally. No, that's super, super informative and definitely makes sense. One of the things I actually wanted to riff on there is a lot of the guests that I've had on the podcast have said that the water ecosystem is just lacking. There's not really a network in water as well built out as it is for potentially energy, or even 10x or 100x larger than energy being tech, right? In terms of just regular SaaS based companies that you would see in Silicon Valley. The question, and I think it's more of actually probably a brainstorm,
mhm.
is what do you think are elements of building a successful climate tech accelerator? And if you were to start from scratch or potentially build a vertical within Third Derivative itself, what does that look like? What are elements of how you get from the way that you felt in 2016, 2018, 2019
Mhm.
to that 60% discrepancy of putting in money to getting to that 75% discrepancy?
Mhm.
What does that look like for water?
Water's a weird one. I don't have to tell you this. I'd say that the general elements are finding the various partners who have a economic interest or a mission interest or a policy interest in doing the things that you want to do. And so that's like incredibly general, but that's what it takes to build the ecosystem of just asking the
Mhm.
question, who, you know, we start backwards from what the world needs. What are the critical gaps that need to be filled so we can have a sustainable world, getting back to 270? So, what are the missing things there? So that's how we end up focusing on carbon and power and so on and so forth. And so then we back into that. Then when we have a focus on, okay, so let's really look at cement, right? Let's really look at hydrogen. Who is working in this right now that, whether they know it or not, should be a part of this coalition because they have some interest in this now and in the future, particularly. And so within waters, and most of my experience, this is a bit outdated because it was with Elemental Accelerator because they had a specific water vertical. Water's almost all the time municipal.
Uh-huh.
From all of the water that exists in the world, probably a large amount of that is municipal. Working with municipalities as customers is a bit funny. And so I would need to do the deeper dive to understand just like the water issue. Everyone sounds like climate, desertification, water. What does that look like? What are the
Yeah,
problems? What can we solve? And what are the opportunities? And who's working on that? What do you think?
I think you're right. And it's popping up throughout the podcast is water is a scary beast because the customer and the distributor of water is primarily municipalities. However, the larger users of water are agriculture, right? That's one of the largest users of water outside of your regular population of us flushing our toilets, using showers and drinking it. A lot of the conversation has come around to this disincentive, mostly around the price of water and it being just this kind of flush and forget sort of mechanism where people don't understand the real value of it. And there is a finite source of it unless we figure out how to make it an infinite source. And just a third kind of through line that's popped up in a few of the interviews is around the leapfrogging that has happened with telecoms being at the top, energy being at second, and then water slowly following, this word of like decentralization pops up a lot around its ability to be actually then given back to the users, right? I think that the kind of headline here is almost taking away the quote unquote control away from the municipalities and giving it back to the population such that they could do rainwater harvesting or whatever these technologies are, basically getting water back into the hands of the folks that use it versus the municipalities, which then really get into this water rights issues and like all of these other things that stack on top of that. But that's, yeah.
And in terms of that, like I know about very few, like there's air to water harvesting, like the source panel. I checked in around a while ago. That's growing. I don't know how much of that can address everything, but that seems like exactly the kind of innovation they're talking where that's decentralized and where that's like a B2C market. Like you worked in a B2C market. It's
painful.
And there are water accelerators, right? There's Imagine H2O, right? That was, I haven't checked on them but that was a great ecosystem in San Francisco. They were doing all water stuff. Do you know, does that still exist?
Yeah, Imagine H2O is still around. I believe Tom Ferguson, who led it, has actually started his own fund called Burnt Island Ventures. And now there's like IL Utilities, and there's another guy in Europe I just spoke to called WaterVent, which is another kind of water accelerator, water connector.
And if you are a water investor, who are you? What do you invest in? Like I'm trying to learn. And so I'm for the benefit of myself, hopefully, and your listeners, like what's like the standard portfolio around a water investor?
Yeah, it's funny you ask that question because the uses of water are so broad that being a water investor is like being an investor in AI, right? AI is used in multiple different verticals, and you can invest in a large language model. If maybe you invest in OpenAI or Google's thing, but at the end of the day, it's the application of how AI is used. The only real problem here is AI is more of a technology horizontal, whereas water is like from a single source. Like you either get it from the ground or from lakes, or you desalinate it from the ocean. There's a number of ways to actually get water into the system. The users of water then are very different, and so it's almost, I guess the only analogy would be like the way that you invest in fuel. If you drill or you bring oil, you would probably be in the same caliber as if you were like a petroleum investor.
So what are the most interesting water innovations? Can I ask you two questions? I don't want to completely.
For sure.
What are the most interesting water innovations? 2 or 3. Question 1. Question 2 is, people ask me this question all the time, but I'm not an expert. Desalination. Why can't we do that cheaper? Like, why is that not a thing?
Yeah.
Like hasn't.
Yeah. And I'm going to anecdotally pull from a few of the interviews that I've had. Water innovation, like the 3 coolest ones that I've heard. The first one actually focuses on agriculture because agriculture is the largest user of water. More around how do you make your crops more water resilient? And the second around that is how do you use data to then just make sure that you're not watering? Because today you basically flood irrigate or you water inefficiently compared to how you could if you had the data and if you had the technology. That's the first thing. The second ones are around gray water and black water reuse. So a lot of our cities' waters, especially in the US, are just dumped into the drain. And so there's a really cool company that's basically doing black water and gray water reuse that puts the dirty water back into the buildings. And secondarily, they also do hot water capture, right? So a lot of our energy is lost to heating up the water for showers and for dishwashers. And about the winter day when there's steam coming off the road, all of that energy could be captured back in. That's the second technology that's really cool. And the third is actually what you just said, I think it's a company called Source Water that does the moisture capture. And they're just these big fish nets that basically capture moisture from the air. Yeah. And to your second question, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say the source panel that I know about, it's roughly like a solar panel that I think you get 8 to 10 gallons a day.
From and then you're around the technology just takes way too much energy today in its current form. And secondarily, actually just came off of an interview is the brine that you put back in is also just really harmful for putting it back in the ocean like that. It just destroys the ecosystem around the decel plant. And so until we figure out a way to reuse or store the brine in another way, and then make
Hmm.
the energy transformation less energy intensive, I think decel at this current state is that's what the major problems are.
Interesting. Interesting. Yeah, there was when I helped create this accelerator for utilities. And one of the participants in that was DEWA, which is the Dubai Energy and Water Authority. And and it was
Mm,
an interesting conversation because they run both and they've had like all the energy that they needed so they could power the D cell. But there's ancillary issues of what do you do with that salt? It's a good question. I feel like we should
yeah,
just put that in our corns of cob and things like that. But
yeah.
it's Morton's should be like there.
Warden should
Um,
be capturing in every single decel plant. Yeah.
yes,
All right.
interrational world, but interesting. Thanks for the download.
Cool, man. Coming close to the end of the episode, it's a question that I asked to everybody. What is a book, a movie, or a TV show that has like given you the overview effect?
Give me, sorry, I missed the question.
Giving you the overview effect. Is there a book, a TV
Oh,
show, or a movie?
good question. I was pretty deep into the first episode of Foundation, which is on Apple TV, and it's based on the Isaac Asimov Foundation series. And
Okay.
that gives an overview because it takes place across many worlds over an incredibly long amount of time. So
Huh.
like over hundreds and thousands of years, you're tracking multiple planets and empires as they evolve. That I like things, especially when I'm feeling like anxious from thinking about climate and just life stuff. I really appreciate things that help me zoom out into sort of geologic time. First of all, I watch a lot of just geology. How did this mountain range form? Things on YouTube. Recommend that. But then the Foundation series, which is now in its second season, is really great.
Awesome. I'll definitely have to check that out. Yeah, I loved from what you're saying. It reminds me of The Three Body Problem by Liu Cixin,
Mhm.
which kind of had this like geologic view of time, which was really interesting from a sci-fi standpoint, but really cool.
Yeah.
Ryan, thanks a ton for coming on the pod. We really appreciated it.
Yeah.
And for all those of you out there, you know where to find us. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or Google Podcasts. Ryan, thanks a ton.
Thank you. Good to see you.